When I get my students to think about eyes, want them to think not only about the lines and the shapes that they're drawing, but what's going on behind and underneath the eye that creates those lines and shapes, because that I find very, very useful, because it makes sense of things. So if you think first of all about the skull cavity that the eye is sitting in, that's usually not really round, it's kind of squared off square, it's sort of rounded square shape rather. And sitting within that you have your eyeball. This isn't strictly biology or anything, but it's roughly that. So this is your eyeball, and then in the middle of your eyeball you have your iris and your pupil. Then you can start thinking about fleshing it out. So this is the bridge of your nose area here, so this is where you'll have the shading. Your tear duct is another important part of the eye, and those tend to be angled down. Sometimes people want to draw them straight into the middle of the nose, which looks a little wrong. They always angle down slightly towards your mouth. So you're looking at your tear duct, which comes away from the side of your eyeball, and then this area is, the skin is the edge of the eyeball. So you have this, and then this skin clothes your eye, so it's coming straight across the top of your iris. And a relaxed eye, you will never see the top of your iris. Very surprised eye you might, but otherwise you won't. So that would be the top of your eyelid, and then you're thinking about the bottom eyelid, and again it skims across the bottom there, not too far away from the iris as well. All the time when you're drawing, you're adjusting and changing things, as long as you've got things roughly in place. At this, for example, I will maybe slightly move down or enlarge depending on what I'm looking at and seeing. But all I want to do is have everything roughly in the right place, and then I know that this skin on top of the eyeball, I've got a big eyelid, is coming here, and this skin is coming over the top of that eyeball, and then the eyebrow is coming from, it usually sits on the top of the skull cavity, so you know it's dictated to by this area here. So you've got everything mapped out. These little creases and shadows under the eye also are usually formed by the skin going over the eyeball and then coming up over the cheekbone. So it's all very helpful to think about what's going on underneath. And then when you're drawing after that, you're just constantly toing and froing and looking at things and making adjustments. But once you've got everything mapped out like that, then you can carry on and just to and fro. So for example, here I might work on this shadow, which is a nice definite shadow here, because I can see this skin creates a two-line shadow. So the skin comes over here, and in this particular eye there's another line caused by the skin. And then there's a graded shadow over here. What I'm looking for is the shapes of the shadows, the main shadow shapes first. That helps. Then there's other things that I'm looking at. Here there's a little shadow underneath the eye. Again, you can see that shadow kind of hits where the bottom of the eyeball is, and little things that you can look at. Once you've got some of these things in place and you no longer need your little guidelines for the eyeball and the iris, and you know that they've served their purpose, you can get rid of them as soon as you like, because they're going to if they're going to distract you in any way. But that's helped you to map out all your shapes. There's other little things to look at with an eye. For example, these lines here, I will never want to keep these as very definite outlines, because I know that there's two lines for the bottom of this eye, for example. This is not just a flat line of skin. There's a three-dimensional aspect to this eyelid. You can see the bottom of this eyelid, and then the shadow on the eye is a very delicate shadow. But I don't need that to be a very hard shadow line. Maybe the harder line will be here where the eyelashes come out. So you're constantly adjusting things as you go along, and not the areas that you think might be your more definite lines aren't necessarily the more definite lines. The line, people want to make this as a very strong, hard line, whereas in fact there's a delicate shadow line there to delineate the edge of the eyelid against the eyeball, and then the really harder line comes with the edge of the eyelashes, which comes a little further in. And that hint of light there creates a more three-dimensional eye. Another thing to think about, since I'm looking at eyelashes now, is the angles of eyelashes. Nobody's eyelashes come straight up from this line on your eye. They usually grow out from your eyelid, and they tend to curve out away towards you and away, so they'll come out that way depending on people. Some people have very straight eyelashes, most people have slightly longer ones and curved out, but they will come out towards you, so the ones coming this side will look like they're going that way. The ones in the middle will be slightly more direct, and the ones closer coming out this way, they will start to turn ever so slightly that way, but we don't normally need to get into such big detail. And again, you will build on those throughout your drawing. You don't want to do those straight away. I'm just getting sidetracked. So I would work on these shadows first, mostly. But I'm just pointing out that this area here is important. This shadow is a shadow, but it's not as strong as the dark outline on the eyelashes, for example. The shadow here over the iris, depending on how dark your irises are, would be a very strong shadow. And then there's this shadow that you get on the edge of the iris. That's another one to work on, because you tend to blend in. Nobody's iris is strictly one tone, so you want to build in the shadow and the flecks and the patterns on the iris, so you'll get a gentle graded tone from the outside of the iris, you'll find on a lot of eyes, and then they tend to have their little patterns and flecks that you can draw in. But it's one of those things that if you gently build with a pencil drawing, instead of going in too hard too soon, you build in your shadows and find your way around what you're drawing. Gently keep looking for clues and looking for extra information and keep building it in. And of course you always have your rubber. Your rubber is another tool. I'm going to put, for example, this iris on this pupil. Sorry, get that right. I'm going to put this pupil in quite dark, and then I can come back at the highlight later if I want to. I can use my rubber as a tool. It's not necessarily... People think the rubber's just for getting rid of mistakes. It's not. It's also a drawing tool. Very, very useful drawing tool. I'm just building into this shadow, just gradually building it up. And then I want to look at this. There's a little bit of an extra shadow here, and I'll build that in more. And this shadow where the eyelid, it's just a delicate shadow, but it's very important for making it feel like the eyelid is sitting on top of the eye. The eye isn't flat. And then this is a slight shadow on the eyelid. It doesn't suddenly go to white. And again here, where these eyelashes come in, it shouldn't be white, but it's not strictly a black line there either. There's an area where you can just see eyelashes and eyelid. So if you just carry on finding clues as you go along all the way and just keep working in. And I'm just going to keep working on this. Obviously the eyebrows, the bottom eyelashes are the same. They tend to work away from the bottom of the eye, but not strictly straight down. And it's only when you're drawing a close-up eye that you even think about detail, complete eyelash detail. But this area is the one I was talking about. You don't need the very strong lines. This area here, which is the bottom of the eyelid, you will often have the light catching that. The same as this area, the light is shining down on an eye most of the time, and you'll find this is a strong shadow. In the same way, this bottom eyelid tends to catch the light slightly, so you don't want it to be a dark outline. But here you'll have a slight shadow. The eyebrows obviously also grow in a certain direction, and if you're drawing close up, you probably need to indicate a definite shape to the eyebrow. They tend to grow up and away this way, and again are dictated to by the fact that it sits on the top of that skull cavity around the eye. So depending on male or female eyebrows, you can go for bushier or more manicured, depending. But people's eyebrows tend to grow that direction, male or female. And then this skin is coming down from the top of that cavity around the eyeball, so there will always be that dip and shadow. And again, these areas here, just build in your shadows very gradually. Your finger's also a good drawing tool. Once you've built in enough of your shadows where you find that you want to start pulling out again with the highlights, because you've got enough ground to play with highlights, then you can use your rubber. Doesn't matter which kind of rubber. I quite like a rubber like this because it's more control, like a pencil. You can start bringing out your highlights again where you feel you need to, and then you go back with the pencil and to and fro. This area is where the light hits the eye more, so I'm quite keen to keep that light. This shadow here is quite a strong shadow across this particular eye, so I'm just going to make it a bit stronger, even though it's probably a little bit too dark at the minute, and then I can bring it back out again. And it casts across here, and it's almost, you can see the shadow of the lashes. A lot of the time the shadows on this eye are reflections of lashes as well, you'll notice, depending on how strong the light is. Sometimes the highlight within an eye is a reflection of a window if you're sitting inside, so you'll see little lines across the highlights simply because what you're really seeing is a reflection of a window. So it's not two highlights, it's a reflection of a certain light. And then within an iris you'll find there's areas where you get the light within the iris looks lighter than the edges of the iris. All these things you can keep pulling backwards and forwards. You could then play with any drawing for hours, looking for extra fine-tuning detail. Depends how much time and patience you want to dedicate to it, but the basics of it are there, and then you can keep coming and going at it and find different eyes and different detail in different eyes to work on.